Hi everybody, my name is Cameron Lucky, and I decided to do a kindergarten math lesson plan for this class. I chose the standard that goes over the question, how many? And we really focus on applying that to counting and all things kindergarten math in this introduction unit. All right, so I have listed the standard on the right, the one that is covered in this lesson. It is count to answer how many questions about as many as 20 things arranged in a line or rectangular array, a circle, or as many as 10 things in a scattered configuration. Given a number from 1 to 20, count out that many objects. So in this lesson, we really focus on the counting as many as 10 things in a scattered configuration. If I were to be doing this in real life, a lesson, I would do 2 lessons over this standard. We would focus on the scattered configurations in one and the more the rectangular arrays and counting out a given number in the second lesson. The prerequisites standards for this lesson were writing out numbers 1 to 20, counting objects and being able to say the names in the standard order. Recognize that the last number name of the said last number name said tells the number of objects counted, and then that they are able to know the same number of objects regardless of their arrangement, and recognize that each successive number name refers to a quantity that is one greater. And then from the standard covered in this lesson, I was able to make many activities for my lesson and then pull objectives out of those in order to make sure that my lesson is engaging the students and that they're actually learning and I'm able to measure their understanding. So the objectives in this lesson are: after viewing a counting video with numbers 1 through 20, the student will be able to successfully recall prior learning of counting with 100% accuracy. So in my lesson, in the introduction, the very first thing we do is I show a 2-minute video where students are able to sing along and count, and it's really a good way for them to review counting 1 through 20. The second objective that I have is, while working individually to respond to questions from the PowerPoint, the student will successfully count the objects 80% of the time. So this is part of our whole group section of the lesson, and we did a I do, we do, you do kind of format for the questions on the PowerPoint. So this would be talking about the you do questions, and the way that I'm able to um, see that is that the students are going to use a think model share method. So I'll be able to view all the students' answers when they share. And then during the 4 different stations, the student will count beans, spoons, forks, and objects on a worksheet with the group successfully 80% of the time. So this comes from our small group work time of the lesson, and I will talk more about that later on, about all the different like activities in the small group, and I have a worksheet that goes along with that, and it'll be taken up to for me to review afterwards. And then using iPads, students will identify the number of objects on Kahoot individually and successfully answer the question 80% of the time. So I made a short little 5-question Kahoot to start out the closure of the lesson. And this is a great way for technology to be integrated, and it allows the students to show me what they know, and they love using the iPad. So it's a 5-question Kahoot, so they should have to get 4 out of 5 right to show me that they have mastered this. And then lastly, given a bag with certain amounts of erasers, crayons, paper clips, and quarters, the student will work individually to count each object and all objects together with 90% accuracy. And then to get 90% accuracy, the student must score 19 out of 21 possible points. A 19 out of 21 on the rubric means that the student scored mostly 3s in all areas, which shows that they have mastered the skill. This comes from the closure part of my lesson. It's actually our exit ticket, our formal exit ticket. And this is where I'm really able to see if the lesson was like if the students grasp the lesson, if they're able to understand and master the skills, the ones from the standards. Okay, so I have just a few activities that I want to kind of like graze over. The first one is the YouTube video. I already kind of talked about that in my objectives, but it's really engaging. It's like a little cartoon video. And then next we have the how many jelly beans or how many jelly beans are in my jar opener. So this is the opening kind of like introduction activity that I do to kind of get the students thinking about the question, how many? I have a jar of jelly beans, and I think I'm going to put like a random amount in there. And I'm going to start asking the students, like, I don't know the number of jelly beans I have. Like, what question could I ask to figure out the number of jelly beans in my jar, to see if they can start thinking about the question how many, and to really apply it to the situation. And then we're going to go around and guess how many jelly beans are in the jar. And then we have our whole group lesson, and that's where I'll use the PowerPoint, and that will do the I do as the teacher, we do together, and then you do, like the student does a few examples. And I'll show snapshots of that later on. And we use the think, model, share method, and I'll talk about that later on. Then we have group work. These are our three little group work activities. We have a spoon and a fork activity, a bag of beans, and then question strips. And I'll talk about that later on. We have a little question time with response cards, and this is after the group work, where I'm able to kind of gauge like how did whole group and group work go, and how are they really understanding before we move on to the closure of the lesson. And I have little response cards that I made, and I'll show those later on. And then I have my Kahoot that I talked about earlier at the beginning of our closure, and then the mystery bag exit ticket at the end of our closure. And I'll talk about those things later on as well. And then now I have my materials. I'll kind of just talk about each one of them really quickly. We have a jar of jelly beans. That, of course, is for my introduction activity. Pencils to write, computer, PowerPoint, projector, all for the PowerPoint and the whole group part of the lesson, and the YouTube video and the Kahoot. Then we have the YouTube link. We have internet, of course, so that I can access YouTube. Ziploc bags, which are used for like storage for the group work activities and different things. The counting disc are for the model part of our think, model, share method that we use during whole group. We have whiteboards, dry erase markers, and erasers, which are for the share part of the think, model, share method. Our worksheets that we'll be using throughout this lesson are group work worksheet, exit ticket worksheet, and paper strips with questions. We have plastic spoons and forks and dried beans and tape, which will all be used for our group work activities. The 4 colored buckets are what the group work activities will be stored in. Response cards for the students to show me how they're feeling and gauge their understanding after our group work activity. Then we have iPads that we'll use to do the Kahoot for the students. We have the link to the Kahoot that we'll do during class, and also have a link for a Kahoot for additional practice for early finishers or enrichment students. Also have a math color by number for early finishers / enrichment students. We have crayons, quarters, paper clips, erasers, and the brown paper bags, all for the exit ticket, the mystery bag exit ticket. All right, so our overview of the procedures section, the introduction, is going to take roughly 10 minutes. The first thing that I'll do is I'll kind of explain to the students that we're about to watch a little video, but this is not just for us to watch. This is for us to interact and sing along and count to 20. We're going to use this as like a little review and refresher from previous lessons. And this also touches on previous standards. I expect students to sing along or hold up how many hands, like if we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth. And that should take roughly 2 minutes. Then we have our jar of jelly beans introduction, and I'm thinking about 6 minutes for this. This is how I want to introduce the question, how many? And like I talked about earlier, I'm kind of going to hold up my jar of jelly beans, and I'm going to be like, who knows, like the number of jelly beans? And I'm going to be really purposeful to not ask the question, how many? I want to phrase it as like number of, like stuff like that, so that, and I want the students to formulate in their heads the question, how many, so they're really able to like connect that question with counting and objects. And then really quickly, I will go over the objectives for the day, like that I did just a few minutes ago on my PowerPoint slide. And then I want us to come up with like 1 or 2 goals as a class over basically what they're going to be able to do by the end of the lesson. For example, one of our goals might be that they're able to count all the objects right in our exit ticket by the end of class. So some sort of like visuals that I have for the introduction. On the left, I don't know if you can see, but the orange like PowerPoint slide, it has a little snapshot from my video that says count for me 1 to 20, and that's what the students will be watching. And then this is an example of the jar of jelly beans that I would be using to kind of help the students formulate the question, how many? And then this is a snapshot from my PowerPoint where I talk about the objectives. All right, now we have the overview of the procedure section. So I have whole group, which will go for about 15 minutes. We have the definition of how many. We'll talk about that. That's on my PowerPoint. And then we'll do the I do, we do, you do structured example problems using the think, model, share method. And the I do is basically the teacher does an example, and I'll walk through the think, model, share method, just me, while the students are watching. And then we'll do an example together where we use the think, model, share method. And then I think the students have like 2 example problems where they will do the think, model, share method themselves. And that is where I will connect that to my objective of the students getting those questions right 80% of the time. So I think there's 5. And then, so that means that they can miss 1. So they'll get a 4 out of 5 to get it 80% of the time. And it's kind of like I'm making notes about that as we're doing a whole group. And then small group will take about 25 minutes. And we have 4 different groups of 5 students. We will have colored back buckets. I'll have blue, red, yellow, and purple. The blue has the spoon and fork activity. And I'll go over that on the next slide because I have a visual for it. And also with the bag of beans. And then the yellow and purple bucket have question strips, and basically I'm just cutting up a worksheet so it's like less questions. So they're going to be in little strips just for the students because they only have about 5 minutes per group. And then after the small groups, we're going to do a little response card to gauge understanding, and this will be how we transition into the closure of the lesson. And this is another way that I will assess the students and gauge their understanding. So first I want to talk about the think, model, share method. Here's a little graphic that I designed, and I came up with this method myself just because I think it really helps me, and it breaks it down and really helps apply math and model it. So first off, think, we're going to use our brain to think about the problem. In this context, it might be we think about how many windows are on the wall. And so we'll think about it, maybe whisper count to ourselves or use our fingers. And then we need to model that. Let's use our counting disc and let's put it out on our desk. Let's set 1, 2, 3, 4 counting disc out on our desk so we can see that they're touch and feel that there are 4 counting discs in front of us. This model could be, you can model it any really way, draw it, use a number line, something like that. And then lastly, share. In my class, we write it on the whiteboard and you're able to raise your hand and share your answer. And this is how me as a teacher will be able to check and see who got that right or wrong. And then some snapshots from our whole group PowerPoint. First, on the left, we have the I do example. That is the one that the teacher does. I will think about how many windows are on the board. Oh, and by the way, the numbers are not on there from the PowerPoint. Those are just kind of to show, I have it animations where the numbers pop up afterwards. So they would be blank, and I would think out loud and be like, oh, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'd think out loud for my class. And then we would do the model. So I would model on the board that there are 5 windows using magnets or something. And then I would share. I would write the number on the board of how many windows there are. And that's then we would do it together, and then the students would do it on their own. And then the examples from the group work activity, we have the spoon and fork activity. So there's going to be a number of spoons and a number of forks in Ziploc bags, and each student will get their own bag of spoon and forks, and they will count out loud to themselves or count to themselves and write down the number, but they'll be in groups. So this allows them to work together to check their answers. And that's for the blue bucket. And then for the red bucket, They're going to get a taped up Ziploc bag of beans. And I think that in my lesson plan, I had like 17 beans in this bag, excuse me. And the students will lay the bag flat and they'll be able to push the beans around and count them and like really feel the beans in the bag. And then right here on the right, we have an example of the worksheet that I will cut up across the red lines. And I have 2 rounds of this in the group work because I'm going to have multiple worksheets that I print out and cut up, so each student will get a different strip each time. And this is an example of our response cards that we'll do at the end of the group work. I came up with these with myself and I'm like really proud of them. And I kind of want to like do more than just like smiley face, sad face, like and confused face. And so I did it's a piece of cake. It's kind of a phrase that we use in my family. Like, it's super easy. I got it. Great. I understand. And then it's a banana split. Like, I'm like 50-50. I almost understand, but I still question a little bit. And then it's as hard as a rock. I don't understand it all. I'm really struggling with it and I need help. And I also did these in like green, yellow, red, as in like go, slow down, stop, so that they're even if the like students can't read, there's a visual for them to help them understand. All right, overview of the procedure section. This is my closure part of the lesson. It'll take like roughly 20 minutes. We have the Kahoot that we'll do on the iPads. They'll take about 5-ish minutes or so. It's not very long at all. It's only 5 questions. They will count the objects on the screen and use their iPad to select the answer. This also relates back to my objective that I had about the students answering the questions on the Kahoot correct 80% of the time. Since there's only 5 questions, they'll have to get 4 out of 5 right for them to get 80%. This is a great way for integrating technology into the lesson and allowing, and the students really love iPads, so that really gets them excited. And then the last part of the closure section is our mystery bag exit ticket. This will take about roughly 15 minutes because the students are working individually. A brown paper sack has an assortment of quarters, paper clips, crayons, and erasers. The student must fill out the corresponding sheet as they answer the question, how many? According to like my last objective, the student needs to get 90% of accuracy on this exit ticket. That means at least 19 out of 20 possible points. And on the next screen, I think I have the rubric that I'll go over as well. All right, so this is the exit ticket sheet and the rubric. So the exit ticket sheet is located on the left. I have pictures along with questions so that the students are able to really know where they're supposed to put their answers. Since we are just in kindergarten, I think that like visuals and pictures is really good. So that's super easy to fill out, asking how many every time. And then we have on the bottom right, we have a screenshot from our rubric. It really just, the questions on the rubric are like the categories are how many crayons, how many quarters, how many paper clips, and how many erasers, and how many total. That all relates back to the exit ticket. And then I'm just going to give them a little score on if time was used effectively throughout the class and if they followed directions. As for me giving points, I have 3 points for all correct or mastered the task, 2 points for counting off by 1 or 2 and proficient in the task, 1 point for counting off by more than 2 or struggling with the task, and 0 points to not answer or needs major remediation with the task. And so that's a total of 21 points. So like I said before, to get 90%, that is 19 or more correct. And then at the top left or top right, I just have a little screenshot from my PowerPoint that will be shown just to give them a little visual. And lastly, my assessments. Formative assessments will be given throughout the lesson. The teacher will ask questions, help students generate the how many question, and really gauge the understanding. The teacher will take notes as she's observing. This will be done really during the PowerPoint like whole group lesson whenever the students are doing the you do part of the examples. And this will be done during group work as well because the students are working in small groups and the teacher's walking around assisting, taking notes. The teacher will allow students to ask questions. So if they're confused, a way to gauge understanding and to assess their understanding is allowing them to ask questions. And then lastly, the students will complete the mystery bag exit ticket with 90% accuracy. As for summative assessments, the student will complete an end of the unit test over all aspects of counting, kind of going back to our prerequisite standards that we covered before, all of those standards and the one covered in this lesson, and maybe an additional one. At the end of the instructional unit, students who do not master this test receive, which means they receive a grade of 80% or below, will be retaught this in small group time. As for assessments, I think the students who don't meet the 90% accuracy for the mystery bag exit ticket will also be retaught this lesson in small groups to help them make sure that they understand, because this is such a crucial lesson because it builds on everything else in kindergarten math. Counting and knowing numbers leads to adding and subtracting and all the other things that are important to learn for like foundational skills. So I hope you enjoyed my PowerPoint and my lesson plan. Thank you so much.